the times as they go and what is occurring in the village. Here is, we're eliminating M, which is a violation of a zoning or sign ordinance, including fire code, building code. That's addressed in other parts of the code. Another definition that we're eliminating is maintenance of property so out of harmony or conformity with the maintenance standards of adjacent properties. That's exceptionally subjective and impossible to enforce. If we don't eliminate that completely, don't be concerned, because there is something called the State Property Maintenance Code, which is enforced, promulgated in Albany and enforced by the village, which picks up maintenance of property. What does that mean? Falling gutters, torn screens, absence of screen doors, grass height, etc. Outdoor burning of any material or structure unless authorized by the village fire department is prohibited, period. Fire code says you can't do it. So it's duplicative to put it in the nuisance code. We're also eliminating section R, maintenance of grounds, landscape, shrubs, plants visible from the public road, which causes, and this is the unconstitutional section, a substantial diminution of the enjoyment, use, or value of adjacent properties. That is absolutely impossible to try to prove. You'd have to get an appraisal of your property and say that the grass next door now made my property go down by $5,000 and put a valuation extra. It's just impossible to do. So we've eliminated it. That does not mean it's a free-for-all on grass or plants or vegetation. Property maintenance code says that you cannot be higher than 10 inches in grass. You recall a year ago we tried to shorten that grass height. That's what this section is. Okay, then it goes on to say there are other items that were eliminated, more on cleanup. Dumping refuse and waste matter is prohibited on public or private highways, roads, or properties. You cannot dump anything from your yard on a public road. So don't take a lounge chair and put it out in the front, think it's going to stay there, or take something else from your neighbor's property, roof tar, and put it out in the street. You cannot dump on private roads. And then we eliminated certain confusing things about private property where there's easements or licenses. It really doesn't make a difference. The bottom line is don't dump on the roads. Parking a vehicle in public view when a failure to maintain its exterior causes such vehicle to constitute an eyesore. We eliminated that. The issue is, under the VTL, if your car is registered, you can stay there. It can't be parked on a lawn, can't be parked the wrong way, can't be all those things, but if it's registered, it may remain on the property. Very obscure vehicles and equipment stored in a residential zone, that's also being eliminated. So those are the eliminations. It's house cleaning, it's cleanup based upon the recommendation from the village prosecutor. That's part one. Part two is a dramatic change for the village of Mastic Beach. There are changes to the code. Actually, there's three parts. Let's call this part B, just so I'm trying to focus the questions that are going to come up, because this is complicated. It shall be unlawful for anyone to own or lease any building which is being used as a public nuisance, which is defined in this chapter. If the property is being used as a public nuisance, as defined earlier, as a place for illegal activity or controlled substances, where there's a deterioration of the property, where there's broken windows, it is illegal to rent such a building. The fine was originally $1,000 and up to 30 days imprisonment. We've now moved that. The recommendation is tonight is to move it to a maximum as set forth in the village code, which is $2,000 or arguably $5,000 per violation if there is a public health effect. We also, the proposal is to increase the public nuisance fines, which originally were set out as the first conviction, $250, second conviction, $1,000, third conviction, $2,500, and/or 10 days in jail. The experience in justice court is that sometimes there are what's called frequent flyers that come multiple times and view these things sometimes as a cost of doing business. The proposal before the board is that we would increase that to the maximum penalty permitted under the village code, which is $2,000, and again, arguably $5,000 when it affects public health. That's the fine provision. The next section, let's call this part 3, I know I keep extending this, but that's what lawyers do. is the blighted property definition. And let me read the legislative intent. The failure to monitor and maintain the housing stock of the village can result in unsafe, blighted, unhealthy, and unsanitary conditions. It is the intention of the Village of Massac Beach to protect the public health, safety, and welfare by authorizing the establishment of procedures to identify, abate, and eliminate the presence of blight upon properties throughout the village. This is applicable, the definitional section, to residences and commercial properties. Blighted properties are defined on a point basis, that there are multiple standards for the points, on what they can be, how they accumulate the points. For instance, a determination by the chief building inspector that the property poses a serious threat to the safety, health, and/or general welfare of the community, 50 points. The owner of the property has been issued summonses and/or has been prosecuted for violations, and such violations have not been corrected, 50 points. Question on that is, how would they be prosecuted and not be corrected? Sometimes people are issued what's called a CD, a conditional discharge. You are allowed to pay a fine, and then you agree to the judge to correct the issue within X number of times, and they don't, 50 points. The property is attracted or been an instrument of illegal, noxious, and deleterious activity as defined in Article 1. That's the definitions that I read before, 50 points. A determination that the fire marshal has constitutes a fire, that the property constitutes a fire hazard, 50 points. Property is creating a substantial interference with the lawful use and or enjoyment of other space within a structure, building, or within the surrounding neighborhood, 50 points. Now, if the chief building inspector can then perform inspection, and these are important because this is blight as defined from outside the home. Boarded windows, doors, entryway, or exits, 5 points. Broken or unsecured windows, 10 points. Broken or unsecured doors, entryways, or exits. What does that mean? I don't mean like my front door where it's not totally latching and my dog pushes it open. I mean off, 10 points. Excessive litter or debris, 10 points. Overgrown grass, 10 points. More than one unregistered motor vehicle, which is prohibited under the code, 10 points. Broken, unsecured, or in disrepair roofs, gutters, shingles, chimneys, shutters, all these things, layout, accessory structures that may be in a bad condition, 15 points. Each one has smaller point totals. And it goes on for extensive list, peeling paint, stagnant water, meaning unsecured pools, presence of graffiti on a property, fencing in disrepair, broken outdoor lighting fixtures. And that doesn't mean bulbs, that means hanging. Open or unsecured wells, cesspools, or cisterns, which is not a joke. That has been seen where cesspools are open. Presence of vermin, rodent harvest, and infestation. That is easy to determine. All these things, improper storage of refrigerators, washing machines, sinks, storage, boilers, tanks, other houses in excess of 72-hour consecutive hours. That means that if you've got a refrigerator on your front lawn for more than 72 hours, you will get 10 points. That has happened. Goes on to say what happens. There are then definitions that these fit within. But I know the question is going to come up, why deal with the points? The points get you to, as an objective proof, up to these definitions. With a blighted property, which is considered a blighted property when you exceed a point value over 100 points. If your house falls onto a blighted property, you then go on to what's called the blighted property inventory list. And that is properties in the village that have accumulated a point value of 100 points. When you get, the village code then provides that if you, maintenance of a blighted property which is over 100 points is then prohibited. Once a property, then what happens? What's the consequence? When a property is blighted and on the blighted property list, which will be developed by the building inspector, the building department will then send a notification to each of the property owners saying you're on it and giving them what their point rating is. The property owner then, because it's due process, there are property rights that attach to these properties. Remember, we live under the United States Constitution. It is critically important to all of us, and it is very important to the village board. we then have to give an opportunity to the property owner to enter a restoration agreement with the village. The restoration agreement would first ensure that the property owner has a certificate of occupancy for what that property is and contains. So if there are illegal structures on the property, that property by definition would not have a CO for those illegal structures. But if you have a CO on the property, you would then identify what repairs and or improvements would be necessary and would set forth a timeline. You would then not have to pay to be on the blighted property list. You can remove your house from the blighted property list, and you will then be, because of the restoration agreement, exempt from the registration fee to be on the blighted property list. If you are on the blighted property list and you do not want to enter the restoration agreement with the village, the registration fee is $5,000 for commercial properties that will be added to the tax bill, and $2,500 for residential properties that are added, and they will be added to your tax bill.
Is that yearly?
Yes. The board has certain incentives that it could offer to property owners if they were going to get off on the restoration agreement, to get off the list. There are a possibility of a 25% waiver of certain permit fees, expediting certain permits in front of the planning board and the building, because obviously the issue, the goal is compliance, to get these houses back into compliance. And the failure to comply with the restoration agreement would place you back onto the blighted property list, where you'll be subjected again to the annual registration fee as outlined earlier of $2,500 or $5,000 for commercial buildings. If you are on the blighted property list, the Board of Trustees, as is outlined in previous hearings, if everyone's attended previous board meetings, recall that we had torn down certain properties. The Board of Trustees, after a public hearing, could declare that property a nuisance, and that the village would have the authority to go onto that property to remedy that situation to the extent that it can on the outside, and then that cost will be charged against the owner and would be a lien as a tax on that property. And any cost that the village incurs in remedying any of the properties would be assessed as a lien on the premises. So that's the three changes to the law proposed.
Excuse me, I have a question.
You're gonna have the public come on. Sign your name. Are we done there, Brian?
Yes.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
Before we start? I think one of the questions that's gonna come up on this, Brian, is there are a lot of homeowners that are still waiting for their Sandy, New York Rising money and other money. They're waiting for their permits. They're waiting for, everything they need, their DEC approval, to actually start the process of rehabbing and lifting their homes. Will there be some type of, something in there for people who were damaged by the storm and are planning on making themselves whole again?
No, but it's not a firm no. And I say it that way because if your property qualifies for blighting, and we need to draft it in such a way that a building inspector would be able to tell that it is blighted and start to accumulate the point calculation. So whether the issue is it's a Sandy storm damaged house, or it's a abandoned house, or a rental house, or a foreclosed on house, the determination of the point value will be the same because it's objective. The property owner, when they receive the notification that they're going to be placed potentially on the blighted property list, will then be afforded the opportunity to enter into a restoration agreement.
Okay.
At that juncture, then they would say to the building inspector, hey, look, here's my timeline. I'm waiting for New York Rising, I'm waiting for this, I've got this, I'm X number of time period out, and that's what would keep them off onto the restoration agreement list, but not on the blighted property list.
And one other thing, when you talk about the village taking over some of these blighted properties, and that we have the ability, would we be able to make, when we're trying to sell the blighted homes and go?
No, not take over, not take over, just abate the nuisance. We don't have the ability under due process to take a home.
Okay.
What we have the ability to do is abate it.
Okay, I'm looking for where you talked about, hold on page
18?
No, 17. Where you talk about all incentives, when we look under the incentives, okay? When we talk about at the discretion of the board of trustee and the ratings of the purchased properties and helping people who are gonna purchase these homes, would there be a way in there when people are purchasing this to make them for owner occupancy? Because I still see the same problem kinda under incentives of people buying them to make them rental homes again, which I think, you know, that's part of what we're trying to do is we have such a tremendous amount of rental homes. What we're trying to do is get more owner occupancy. Is there a way under incentives to incentivize it to make it owner occupancy?
Well, I think 316, that section on incentives, is wide enough that if that's an incentive the village board wants to consider, they can do
We can do
it. So
that.
if you get a property, for instance, to play that out, if you get a property that's on the blighted property list, and the Egan family wants to buy it, and says, you know, 212 Huguenot is on the blighted property list, the Egan's want to buy it, we want to enter into a restoration agreement, is there anything we can do on an incentive basis with permits or otherwise discounted to try to do that? We can certainly do that.
Mr. Egan was there, a great job on the point system, I like it very much. I'm just wondering, in the original chapter 50 from Huntington, they had a seizure law with two nuisances, and you just made the statement that we can evade and we can't seize.
Correct.
How can they get away with that? I believe there's several dozen homes.
I don't think that they do.
Okay.
You know, we looked at that, I think that there may be laws on the books that are not necessarily enforced, or laws on the books that have continued and been challenged or currently in court challenges. Our office looked closely at that, and we had some constitutional concerns.
Okay. No, I think the document is very well prepared, thank you.
The crack house law.
Frank, we're gonna take public comments, so you wanna comment?
That's a nuisance law, Frank.
Anybody else on the board? Let's go. Pat, state your name and address, please, we're open for public comment.
I can't give you the name and address, then you may come after me.
Yeah, then you can't speak.
There you go, you got it. You didn't mention anything about
You didn't
banking.
mention
Name and address.
Frank.
Oh, Pat Liberty, 87 Biltmore Drive, Maston Beach. You didn't mention anything about bank-owned properties.
They're on it.
They're on it?
Yeah.
Okay. On my block, for 10 years, I've been looking up a boarded house. It's got black mold in it like crazy. The house next to it is abandoned. The house on the other side is not only abandoned, the whole roof line on the side is hanging down, like this. All right? There's animals up in there, we see them. Squatters can't get in, the door is locked. We just got rid of squatters out of a house down the block. Okay? But the electric company came last week and put some meter on this house. And everything's falling down. They put a meter on it. By doing that, that house now has electric, so if squatters want to get in there, they got power to put in heaters, lights, anything they want to do. All right? Now, within the vicinity of my home, there are 5 vacant homes that are abandoned. 2 of them are in the worse condition than, 3 of them are in the worse condition than ever. Of those 5, 1 of them, the police department is working with me on it, and we did get them out. That was the squatters down the block. That worked out beautiful. They had a stolen car back there. They were stripping it down and everything. But this property across the street from me, not only is it boarded up, it's become a dumping ground. They're dumping garbage there.
What's that address?
Uh, 86.
Just on a question, just because LIPA, or whatever their name is this week, put a meter there, doesn't necessarily mean the
Oh,
house
that
has
the electric is on? No, that I
Right,
understand.
what they do that for safety reasons, because they don't want somebody coming and putting their hand in the meter pan. So the best way to tell is if you see the meter is where it's readable,
Well, I stole a boat. That's why it broke the
okay,
meter.
they just put them back. They usually, when they put them in there, they put a plastic shield behind them, and the meter's usually cocked on a 15-degree angle.
Okay.
And then they put the seal back on.
Now, the same property that I'm talking about, there are 4 or 5 dogs that died on the property, and they're buried in the backyard. And behind the house is a patio. It's concrete, but there's a cesspool cover right there. It's filled to the top.
I think that house would probably get enough points to qualify.
Yeah.
I think that's a winner.
I think that's a winner there.
And, I mean, it's got some nice shrubs, I wanna go dig them out for myself.
I want to be careful too. This,
And maybe it's bank owned, that's the
yeah,
problem.
just for the record, it's clear, bank owned or otherwise, you're going to accumulate the numbers. I don't want to turn this into a hearing on individual properties, that's a good example, but at the same time, this is a law of general application throughout the village. So I don't want the record to reflect that this is targeted towards any one house, property owner,
No,
type of owner, or group
I
of
mentioned
owners.
5 houses.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sure Nick wrote them address down.
And 95, the electric was still on.
All right, thank you.
Sounds like you're going to be real busy.
Oh, there is a record.
Walt Meschenberg, 142 Park Drive.
Hey,
Quiet,
everybody,
please.
quiet, please.
I don't even, got some problems here with some of this nuisance stuff, folks, and this property thing. First of all, as a combat veteran for over 3 tours, first of all, stay off me. As long as I don't have a safety violation by monitoring people with points and all that, I just had one of your nice code enforcement persons, and this is what I'm gonna relate to this nuisance thing.
Well, does this got something to do with what happened to you?
No, yeah, but I'm
Related
also
to this
gonna.
nuisance law?
Okay,
I mean,
yeah,
I'm
exactly.
gonna give you the opportunity to talk, but that's under the public comment at the end.
All right, now let me ask you about this property thing, about you saying there's gonna be marking property with points and all that stuff, am I understanding that?
Marking property with points?
Yeah,
There'll be a
some-
point system.
Okay, first of all, stay off my property unless it's a safety violation. I've done 3 combat tours, another thing is, if I need the permits, I'll get them, but for you folks to put points on my property, as long as I'm keeping it neat, and I'm looking at it as an individual, not the other thing, Mr. Mayor.
I want to be clear too, this code, absent a public hearing at the end, which the state courts have said it is legal for abating nuisances that have risen to such a level that the abatement needs to happen. We have very rarely exercised that.
Okay.
We've only done the tear down a couple of times on properties that were such a bad level, the tree house, you know, houses that were uninhabitable and beyond repair. I mean, the worst.
I just don't want this to go, you know what I mean,
Well,
so by going
absolutely.
overboard.
The point, and I want to be careful about that too. The constitutional rights of every citizen in the village must be paramount of any law that we pass.
Okay.
So let's be crystal clear about that.
Good.
And I want to thank you for your service too. That's what you were fighting for. All of these violations, any observation by code enforcement, again, they're exterior. They would only be done from the curb line. They would not have to go into your backyard or
Okay.
anything like that.
All right, that's what I want to make it clarify, I'm gonna understand that. All right, that's all I want to
Walter,
say.
yeah, I think this law, I mean, you know, I spent a lot of time now driving around with people from New York Rising, Rebuild Design, people from FEMA, and you know too, as thank you for your service, not only for your 3 tours, but also from the ambulance company. You know that there are hundreds of vacant properties that are blighted and abandoned, or in such bad condition that as Attorney Egan says, you can see from the curb. I mean, you can drive down Neighborhood Road, there are 10 houses between here and Parkview, or Park, I'm sorry, that are boarded up with the gutters falling off, the roofs are obviously just in miserable condition. We're not talking about houses where people live, we're talking
Okay.
about houses that have been vacant and abandoned, and some of these houses, over a decade, these houses have been like that, so we have to do something. You know, it's not fair to the neighbors of the people that next to those houses, and it's not fair to all of us in Mastic Beach. If we're gonna really start to make Mastic Beach Village, you know, all that it can be, we have to deal with the fact that we have hundreds of blighted homes. And this is really targeting the blighted homes. It's not targeting individual residences where people
Oh, yeah,
are
that was
blighted.
that was my main concern, that you start talking individuals, I want that clarified. All right, that covers that, thank you.
Thank you, Walter, and thank you for your time.
Hi, I'm Mary Zolfino, 71 Edgewood Drive. We have a house on our block that's like that too, crazy lawn and all that. But I was more concerned also, in this thing that you're gonna do, are you gonna put something into your resolutions that, like, say there's elderly people who are living only on Social Security, or a family that's someone lost their job, and they can't afford to go into this fix my house up? You know, can you like get an organization like the Boy Scouts, the Eagle Scouts, to do their projects and offer them that way, maybe? Because I know a lot of elderly people live only on a very small amount of Social Security, and taxes are high, and a blight on the house, if you're gonna do points by like this no screen door, a broken window, the paint fading, I just would want you not to go that far, or to offer someone help.
Can I say something to that?
I got it now when you get your chance.
It's vacant, it's really vacant and blighted properties. We're not going over after properties where people are actually living in there. And I have to say, one of the committees, the beautification committee, and somebody on that has already spoken about doing an adopt a house program.
Yeah, I
Where
think it's great.
they
I
would like to
totally agree.
adopt a house with a senior, but that's really not what the intent of this law is. Really, we have over 700 vacant homes if we count the Sandy damaged
Oh, I
homes.
totally agree.
And we have over 300 vacant homes that are bank foreclosed or homes that people have walked away from.
We decided to
That's
stay.
what we're trying to deal
We were
with.
moving, we were leaving, we were gonna go, I wanted to move to an HOA, because I just can't deal with all of this domestic abuse. But we decided to stay, rebuild, put a second story on our house, lift our house, we're staying. We've lived here for
Thank
30
you for
years.
Yay.
And
I gotta say, I mean, I don't know if you've been coming to all the village meetings in the past 2 years, but in the beginning, we've always mentioned that if there's anybody who's on, disability or anybody who's on a fixed income, many of organizations, Patasquash Creek, Domestic Beach Property Owners, Osprey Point, including the village ourselves, we've actually went in and helped people, either a tree down or
Yeah,
rake
no,
in or
that's
cutting.
good. I
There's
just wanted
plenty
to
of help
ask
out
you
there.
if
The
you
only
wanted
thing
to
we
try
ask
to
the
do
people
that.
is, it's gotta get to us. Don't be afraid to ask us
No,
that.
we're good, I just worry, like, I see the older people buying, how they buy their food, and, you read all these stories, and you don't think about other people besides yourself.
Thank you.
To Mary's point, if I may, if you look at the point system for some of the things that may address the concerns of the people you have like roof, gutters, siding, shingles, chimneys, and shutters, they're in a 5 to a 10-point range. You need to get up to 100 points to be put on a blighted list. Even with peeling paint, that would be another 15 points. So even if you added all that up, you're up to around 65, 70 points on somebody. It's the big stuff comes in with the nuisance laws, the dealing, and that type of thing, and some of the things that a senior wouldn't be dealing with, like broken windows or boarded up windows or things of that nature. So I think in looking at the point system, I think it would be pretty fair in addressing everybody's concerns. But your point is well taken, thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
I just have a couple of Frank Appialos for you, my friend. A couple of things. One, we drove around, my wife and I, when we did counting the blighted houses. And the houses with people are as blighted as the houses without people. All right, so to say we're only gonna go after abandoned houses, there are some houses, they can see right through them, and there's people that live in them, right? The other thing, I agree that there's elderly people here that cannot do a new roof on their house. And I think and I know it's Smithtown, I'm not sure if Brookhaven does it, where they will pay to do a new roof on a house, and then put a lien on the house, so when the house is sold, they get paid back for the roof, but the roof gets done.
I wouldn't want to open a Pandora's box.
I'm just saying,
That
that's,
could be very
it's done in other places. Because there are people. Okay.
All right, thanks again, Frank. And this is related to this, okay.
No, I actually got Frank Marino, 464 Riviera. I commend you for taking firm action, against the blighted homes and that issue. This, it's as good as the implementation, and I see the need for hiring additional personnel supervision of this effort. I don't know how you're gonna get it done with the current staff, and I'm thinking qualified persons need to be added for this to be effective. Otherwise, we go back to the pre-village days of great laws on the books, but what good is it? They're not being implemented. So that's why I came up. The other thing is, I think code enforcement officers need to have a great deal of PD, professional development to bring them up to snuff on what we expect back from them. And I would love a presentation to the Quality of Life Committee, that I'm chair of, on these once it's enacted. So for us, our members to understand what they should be looking for as they go around. As far as the, Bruce, your mention about criminal offenses, Suffolk County has a crack law. The crack law is I think it's 18 months, but there has to be a conviction. Otherwise, you're guilty, you're innocent until proven guilty. So there is something on the books. Kate Browning put it in play. It's a crack house law.
for all of those things you might think in terms of dealing drugs. And there is opportunity. The only thing is, it's a weak law because it doesn't say what it is that happens. It cites the condition, but it doesn't do as much as it should do in terms of saying, now that you found this property and this condition exists, what happens next? So it's an imperfect law. So the other thing is, again, I make the case, since there's so many absentee homes or absentee owners who potentially could cost this village additional expense, it's time to look at raising fees, whether they be administrative fees, you call them, or whether they be absentee owner rental fees. Because we're gonna absorb additional expense here. As you say, the numbers are tremendous. Okay?
Thank you, Frank.
Anybody else want to speak on this? All right, with that, I guess we're going to close the public hearing on amending chapter 300. All in, do I have a motion?
I'll motion to close the public hearing.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
That's- Second, Mayor Biondi, first trustee Suma. All in favor? Aye.
Just make a motion to close the bid.
Resolution passes.
Make a resolution adopting amending chapter, you just read to amending chapter.
Amending chapter 300 of Village Code to change the conditions and activities deemed nuisances and to change the penalty provisions for any violation of the nuisance chapter has passed.
I'll second. All in favor? Gary Stoddard.
All in favor?
All in favor, aye, opposed, none? Okay, now that we got through the easy part. Okay, just a couple of resolutions real quick. Resolution authorizing the payment of the present bills as per abstract A1-2014 A in the amount of $326,946.62. So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Resolution accepting the May 7, 2014 work session minutes. So moved.
I have a question.
On the last page, we have trustee Capiello. I think she's no longer a trustee.
Okay, I'll change that.
And I just need a clarification. I see that, Brian, we had that we were doing a public hearing